Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Robert Winfree, and I'm going to apologize for my voice a little bit. It's probably going to go in and out a few times. Excuse me. I've been sick over the last couple of days, and at least I didn't lose it before the show. I mean, knowing my luck, the next couple of days I will just have straight up no voice, so. Thankfully, it's just. It'll go up and down a little bit, but I apologize in advance, but I can only do so much about my health. Tonight we will be having a relatively short show. I'm flying solo tonight. Jeff is busy. A lot of us are scrambling around at 411 due to Larry Zonka being out of action for a little bit. Get well soon, Larry. We all miss you. And he's just had some stuff come up because tonight, as I am recording, the WWE Royal Rumble is going on, and that's kind of a big deal, especially for our site because we're predominantly a wrestling site, and that drives the majority of the traffic. So I get it; it's cool, no problems. Hopefully, Jeff will be here next week, although next week is a little bit up in the air right now as well because of the Super Bowl. It'll probably just be recorded earlier than usual because I have a family thing that goes on over the Super Bowl that I'm not the biggest fan of American football, but it's a family tradition at this point, and I'm not gonna, and I tend to honor that if nothing else. Anyway, tonight, again, short, it's just me. I will be previewing UFC Fight Night 144? Yes, 144. Which is the UFC, they're in Fortaleza? Yes, they were in Fortaleza, Brazil. It's a really good card, actually. And then just a real quick rundown of some of the major news points over the last week, which aren't a whole lot. It was a really relatively quiet news week, all things considered. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this. UFC Fight Night 144. Again, from Fortaleza, Brazil. Next Saturday, the entire thing will be on ESPN+. Both prelims and main card, at least for those of us in the United States. The ESPN deal is, again, local to the States. Wherever you happen to get your UFC action around the world. Most of that is still in place, I think, although their UK stuff might be currently in flux. I think they reverted back to BT Sport after having some issues with the people they were going to go to. So, yeah, I trust you all know where you're going to get your stuff locally. Anyway, the main event is this whole card is sneakily very, very good. Again, there's some potential downers here. Don't get me wrong. A few of them actually. Jeez. But there's some good ones, and the main event in particular, we have a rematch between Rafael Assunção and Marlon Moraes. In a perfect world, this would crown your number one contender for the bantamweight title, because Assunção is actually 1-1 with TJ Dillashaw. He beat TJ in 2013, lost the rematch in 16, but 1-1. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. Good grief, since dropping to bantamweight, he has only lost to TJ. His bantamweight record, prior to that he was at featherweight, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He is 11-1 at bantamweight. Assunção doesn't get a lot of play because he's not the most exciting fighter, and his style is a lot more shutdown oriented. He just kind of stops you from doing what you really want to do. And it's not always the most fan-friendly, but it is, personally I find it rather interesting. And he beat Marlon Moraes June of last year, of 17, not 18. We are in 2019 now. For the record, I thought he lost that fight. I thought Moraes won. But clearly, again, one of the top bantamweights in the world right now. And then you have Marlon, who's also one of the top bantamweights in the world. His only loss dating back to 2011. In November of 2011, he lost to Dividius Torresvicius. Since then, he went on a massive winning streak, had the split decision loss to Austin Cao, then won 3 in a row, beating John Dodson, knocking out Aljamain Sterling, and knocking out Jimmy Rivera. And again, I thought he beat Austin Cao the first time around. Now they get 5 rounds to play around with. I liked Marlon Moraes the first time around. I like him the second time around. He seems to have gotten a little bit better since then. Again, his last 2 wins have been first-round knockouts, so seeing him go the full 25 minutes will be interesting, and I wouldn't be shocked if this one does, because Austin Cao's never been finished at bantamweight. Again, the lone loss in that weight class is to TJ, and that was a decision. I expect a lot of the same stuff that we saw in the first fight, but I don't know. Again, I like Moraes here. I just do. I thought he won the first one. I think he makes it more definitive this time around. I think he's the one rising up. I think he's the one surging. And I would love to see him fight for the title. I don't think I'd pick him over TJ at bantamweight, but I think he's a very game opponent. I think he's the deserving number 1 contender. And unfortunately, we have that whole super fight between Cejudo and TJ just completely screwed up 2 divisions, as most champ versus champ fights tend to do. And then it didn't even go the way the UFC wanted, which was hilarious. I would just love to take a look into the alternate timeline where TJ wins, and we could even do it in identical fashion how Cejudo beat him, 30 seconds, stoppage the same way, and hear everyone talk about that it was a good stoppage, because Dana White would. Yeah, that was clearly the outcome he was hoping for. Or at least the promotion was. And instead we got what we got. But now Cejudo's talking about coming up to bantamweight and fighting for the belt there, which makes this a somewhat superfluous fight, because while the winner here should be the number 1 contender, they're probably going to get leapfrogged by Cejudo. In minor fairness to Cejudo, he did just knock out the current champion in 30 seconds. Which is, an incredible feat, mind you, but it also took place at flyweight, and I'm not the biggest fan of guys Q-jumping when they have no history in the division they're jumping into. Now, granted, Cejudo has 1 fight at bantamweight in the UFC, but it might have been his actual debut fight, and a few years ago, and it was against a good fighter, but not an elite level fighter. Was it Chico Camus? I want to say it was Chico Camus. I need to look this up now, because if I don't, I'm not gonna... No, that was his flyweight debut. No, that was much later. Kimura, that was it. Dustin Kimura. Then he beat Carriazo, Chico Camus, Jussier Formiga, got beat by DJ, lost the split decision to Benavidez, and then went on his winning streak to where he is now. I don't like it. I think it leaves the winner of this fight out in the cold, which I don't like, because both these guys have absolutely put in the work in the division. As for how I see the fight itself going, again, while I favor Moraes, a lot of the stance switching that Austin Cao does can give him some problems, especially because Moraes likes to fight out of one stance. He does a lot of switch kicking, and it's beautiful. The switch, not just the kick that he landed on Jimmy Rivera, but if you rewatch that finish, watch his feet, man. That switch that he does right before the kick is beautiful and fast. The man his quick twitch muscle fiber is insane. He just does stuff like that, and it just doesn't give you a lot of time to react. When he knocked out Aljamain Sterling, it was a really nice mid-move adaptation, because he was clearly going to throw the switch kick, but because Sterling was leaning in, he adjusted to the knee and just cold-cocked him with that. He's got good hands. I think the big knock on Austin Cao is that he's more of a shutdown fighter, in the sense that he just wins rounds and just tries to very relatively clearly win the round with takedowns, back control, proper defense. It's not that he can't punch or kick. He does. He has power in both. But he doesn't put himself out there as much. And Moraes is a bit more of the explosive fighter in this particular scenario, the much more dynamic much more dynamic party. Excuse me. I see the kicks being a big factor, leg kicks for both guys. But I don't know. I have a really hard time picking against Moraes generally, and especially a rematch of a fight I thought he won. So I got Moraes here, but it's a really good fight. It's a really good fight. In your co-main event, there was a bit of controversy around this not being the main event. Jose Aldo versus Renato Moicano. Apparently, the UFC wanted this to be the main event, and Jose Aldo's basic response to them was, "You're fighting for 5 rounds versus fighting for 3 rounds doesn't affect my pay. I'm not interested." And I know Aldo's a bit of a malcontent in some respects, but he's got a point. I mean, if you're not getting paid significantly more to go through the extra damage of a potential damage of a 5-round fight, the extra expense, both physically and financially, of a training camp for a 5-round fight, if you're not getting paid more, I kind of, again, I see his point. I mean, again, if you're in a title fight, sure, it's always 5 rounds. And guys like Austin Sau and Moraes are trying to stake a claim to that top spot, so 5 rounds it gives them more time to breathe. And quite frankly, for both of them, given that their first fight went to a split decision, having those extra 2 rounds to play with might benefit one, or it should benefit one of them. If you thought you won the first fight, but you only have 3 rounds and you only have 1 round scoring to play with, maybe getting those extra 2 rounds to really kind of definitively put a stamp on it is more appealing. Jose Aldo's also been in a lot of 5-round fights in his career. A lot of them. I mean, if we look at it, he's just coming off the Stevens win, which was a first-round finish for him. He had the back-to-back beatings from Max Holloway, both of which ended in the 3rd round. The fight with Frankie Edgar that went all 5 rounds. Good fight, by the way. Before that, he had the McGregor loss. Then prior to that, you had the Mendes rematch, which was a great fight, all-time great fight. Went all 5 rounds. The Ricardo Lamas fight went all 5 rounds. The Chan Sung Jung fight went into the 4th round. The first fight with Frankie went all 5 rounds. The first fight with Mendes, he knocked him out at the last second of the first round with a knee strike. The Florian fight went all 5. The Hominick fight went all 5. We're getting into his WEC tenure. He knocked out Manny in the 2nd. But the Faber fight went 5 rounds. Like there's a lot of 5-rounders and a lot of late fights, and none of those are easy fights. I mean, the closest he has to an easy fight in that stretch is arguably Lamas, I suppose. I mean, he beat Hominick everywhere, but he was also dealing with whatever illness he had at the time. It's, again, there's a lot of time with a lot of really tough guys on his resume. If he doesn't want to fight 5 rounds, or he doesn't want to fight it for the pay that he would get, I don't blame the guy. I mean, he has stated he's on his way out, that he's going to fight 3 more times this year, and then that he plans on that kind of being the end of it. We'll see. Again, we'll see if that holds up. But 5 rounds is a lot, man. And the difference between 3 rounds and 5 rounds is pretty significant in the toll it can take on your body. And if you're not going to be compensated differently for a 5-round fight over a 3-round fight, if you're not going to put yourself in title contention, I kind of see the point. I think there should be I think in fighter pay scale, there should be a thing where, you're average, you have your normal pay. Then if you're in a 5-round fight, a non-title 5-round fight, you are compensated more for that. I feel like the longer a fight goes, the damage, not only damage potential increases, but the actual damage tends to increase, and it increases not in a linear fashion, but more like orders of magnitude. The difference between, again, like the damage you take out in 3 rounds versus even just one more round. Like just that last, even if your round ends in the fourth, that fight ends in the fourth round, you're suddenly dealing with a significantly greater amount of damage that relative to a 3-round fight, and I think it deserves extra compensation. So again, I don't blame Aldo for his perspective, and that said, it's a darn good fight. I mean, again, you have Aldo, who's I go back and forth about whether or not I think Aldo or Holloway is the best featherweight ever. And basically based on how I want to qualify best ever. I mean, from a technical perspective, yeah, it's Max. Max is the best. I don't think he quite has the body of work to supplant Aldo as greatest featherweight ever yet. I think he'll get there, probably by the end of this year, I think. But you're still dealing with an all-time great in Jose Aldo, a guy who would have been the first champ in the UFC if they hadn't... Because remember, he was talking about going up to challenge Pettis when Pettis was the lightweight champion. But the UFC's stipulation at the time was if you're going to even take that fight, you have to relinquish the featherweight belt, and he wasn't willing to do it. And I think he would have beaten Pettis. I really do. But again, all-time great against Moicano, and Moicano's really surging. He has a grand total of 1 loss professionally, and that was to Brian Ortega. In a fight he was doing quite well in, and then before getting caught in that guillotine in the 3rd round. He's won his last 2. He beat Calvin Kattar. He submitted Cub Swanson. Moicano definitely on the up and up. This is a really good fight, and I don't know who to pick. I go back and forth on this one. I don't like picking against Jose Aldo generally. I did in the Stevens fight and immediately regretted it because Aldo turned in a great performance. I mean, stopping Stevens with that body shot. I mean, that liver shot hurt me, man. Just watching it, oof. That pain, man. If you've never been hit really hard to the liver, and bear in mind, I've been hit pretty hard to the liver. It sucks. I've never been hit half as hard as Jose Aldo hits. I would guarantee you that. And I'm not a small guy, I'm about 6'1", somewhere in that vicinity, way over 200 pounds. And I guarantee you Jose Aldo hits it's significantly harder than I do and harder than I've ever been hit. And that body shot hurt me, man. That hurt just to watch. That was wicked. But Moicano's a very slick technician. I think a lot of this will come down to pace. Jose Aldo is, again, an all-time great. But if you look at the ways, and these are some very subtle things that Max Holloway did to be so successful, it's very easy to say one of them was pace. But how do you implement that safely is a whole other thing. Holloway just never let Aldo kind of rest between flurries. Anytime Aldo would flurry, Holloway would back up, reset, and then just keep going. And it eventually just kind of broke him down. I think Moicano has the potential to do some stuff in that same vein. He doesn't stance switch as well as Holloway does. I don't think anyone stance switches as fluidly as Max Holloway, especially mid-combination, the type of stuff that he does. But Moicano's got some good straight punches when he wants them. Both guys have good jabs. I mean, Aldo's jab is tremendously underappreciated. Both men have good kicks, and I mean, this is one of those things that, leg kicking with Jose Aldo, Aldo's leg kick defense isn't great. And just because he has really great leg kicks does not somehow inure him from taking hard leg kicks. It just means you have to be ready to, you either have to have your leg kick defense on point or just be prepared to eat the ones coming back. But just because you have great leg kicks does not mean that you are somehow immune to being kicked in the leg. It just means it has to be set up differently. And again, your defense has to be on point. So we could see some really hellacious leg kicks go back and forth. I think Moicano can get a little wide with his strikes at times, which might leave some openings for Aldo to capitalize on. Both men are superb grapplers. Again, Aldo's jiu-jitsu game is again another horribly underappreciated aspect of his overall skill set because he just doesn't use it that often. But his grappling is unbelievably legitimate. I mean, dude beat Cobrinha when they were both brown belts at the Worlds, and I mean that's a hell of a thing to do. So, God, I'm gonna pick Aldo here, but I'm very prepared for Moicano to surprise a few people and pull this one out. That's a really good fight. We also have, and again, there's a few other fights down this card that are pretty darn good. Damian Maia's fighting, which is kind of hit or miss. Still at welterweight. Interesting decision. Maia's kind of up against it. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. Now, granted, it's to Tyron Woodley in a title fight. The fight sucked, but it was a title fight. Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. Those losing to those three guys. Those are the three best. Those are like three of the top 4 welterweights in the world. Certainly in the UFC. Where you want to put Rory McDonald in that conversation is up to you personally. But those are probably the three top welterweights in the UFC. All due respect to Stephen Thompson. But he really could use a win. And then we have Lyman Good. Good just came back from what was it? Was it injury? Because he had a fairly significant layoff. Yeah, he was over a year between the loss to Capoeira dos Santos and his knockout of Ben Saunders. Okay, no, he had the drug test issue after beating Andrew Craig, but prior to the Dos Santos fight. Excuse me. So yeah, he had the year between those fights just because of was it a knee injury? No, it was just kind of how long that one took. Okay. This is a big fight for Lyman Good, and Lyman Good could win this. He's a physical specimen, and he hits pretty hard. I'm speculatively picking Good there, but Maia probably puts on another jiu-jitsu clinic. Next up, this fight's really good. We have Charles Oliveira, who will once again campaign to return to featherweight unsuccessfully because shut up. But he's won his last 3 fights. He has the most submissions, and he is fighting David Tamer, who is a significantly underappreciated fighter in the UFC. Tamer is 8-1 overall. He is 1, 2, 3. He is 5-0 in the UFC. I really like Tamer. I've been kind of high on the guy. This fight's a bit much for him. It's a big step up. I mean, his last 3 wins have been Lando Venata, Drakkar Klose, and Nick Lentz, and don't get me wrong. Those aren't easy fights. None of those are easy fights. But I think Oliveira is one step above, the Nick Lentzes of the world. He actually beat Nick Lentz, so this is a tough one. I expect Oliveira to really try to get this to the mat, but one of David Tamer's better assets is his footwork, his circling, his ability to actually fight while going backwards. He's not just a guy who runs away. He knows how to fight while backing up. They're 2 very different skill sets, and a lot of times they tend to get a little bit confused. And David Tamer is really good at fighting while backing up. This is a real tough one. Logically it's Oliveira, but Oliveira's got some size on Tamer too, I think. Tamer's a bit of a short guy for that weight class. Yeah, I'll go with Oliveira, but again, that's a really good fight. Johnny Walker versus Justin Ledet. Kind of I can't say do or die thing for Ledet because he just lost for the first time professionally when he dropped down to light heavyweight. And he lost to Alexander Rakic, who is a guy I think is up and coming at 205, where they desperately need up and comers, and I think Rakic is one of them. But Walker just knocked out what's his face, Khalil Roundtree. That really nice just elbow from a double collar tie. It was a really nice elbow strike. So we got a couple of strikers. Again, there's some firework potential there. I don't know who I'm picking. Ledet actually kind of looked a little bit better at heavyweight than he did at light heavyweight, based on his last fight. So we'll see if that pattern holds. I don't know. Again, this is a real tough one. I'll go with Walker, but there could be some fun there. We have Livia Hanata Souza. Oh, she's got a gimme. Was she supposed to fight someone else? Or was this always this fight? No, this was always this fight. Okay, Livia Hanata Souza gets a gimme. Souza is legit. I mean, her only loss is to Angela Hill. It was a split decision that could have easily gone her way. She has won her last 3 fights. She won her UFC debut. She's legit. She's a legitimate strawweight, and she's fighting Sarah Froda, who does not have a Wikipedia page, and I don't think has ever even fought in Invicta. So I fully expect Souza to steamroll another kind of tomato can here. And that's your main card. On the prelims, we have Marcus Perez and Anthony Hernandez. Not the worst fight in the world. This was supposed to take place at UFC 233, but after that event got canceled. Perez is 1-2 in the UFC. I don't know. Go with Perez. Why not? Thiago Alves is fighting Max Griffin. Alves is in a bit of a do-or-die spot. I mean, he's 1-4 in his last 5 with losses to Carlos Condit, Jim Miller, Curtis Millender, and Alexei Kunchenko. His only win is over Patrick Cote, and I mean, Cote isn't exactly cream of the crop necessarily. And on the other hand, you have Max Griffin. Is this Tyson Griffin's brother? Is this a different Griffin? I can't remember, because I know Tyson Griffin's brother also fights. No, I think it's a different. Okay, Max Griffin. He's been kind of a 500 fighter in the UFC. He's 2-3 at the moment. Coming off of a loss to Curtis Millender. I don't know. It's a tough one. This is probably the easiest fight Thiago Alves is going to get, in theory. And Griffin's a good boxer, man. He's got just really kind of solid punches. And Alves kind of struggles with guys who really know how to keep a jab in his face. Yeah, this is overly sentimental, but I'm going with Alves. Mara Romero Barella. She's Italian, so double L is a different sound. She's 1-1 in the UFC. I mean, she just got beat by Caitlin Chukagian in her last time out. Prior to that, she tapped out Kalinda Fajea. She is fighting Talia Santos, who I think has fought in the UFC before, but I need to confirm this. Talia is 15-0. I've seen her fight, I swear. She last fought on Dana's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Am I confusing her with someone? I must be. Yeah, I must be just confusing her with someone else. I actually kind of like Santos there. 15-0 is nothing to sneeze at. We have heavyweights as Junior Albini desperately tries to right the ship of his career after Man, he debuted so strongly against Timothy Johnson. I mean, he looked really good in that fight. Then he does nothing against Andrei Arlovsky. Then he gets Ezekiel choked. I mean, yeah, it's Alexei Olenek, but you shouldn't be getting Ezekiel choked in the UFC. Just if you're getting hit with that, you probably shouldn't be in the UFC. He was supposed to fight somebody else, Dmitry Sosnovsky. That got pulled out, and now he's fighting promotional newcomer. I'm going to butcher this gentleman's name. Holy crap. Jarzino Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik is Suriname? Is that the Surinamese flag? It is! Ha! I remember what the flag of Suriname looks like. Rozenstruik, excuse me, there's no Rozenstruik. He is 6-0. Fought in Ryzen at least once. I almost can't pick Junior Albini at this point after how bad he looked his last couple of fights, but I think I will here. It's kind of on principle. At bantamweight, Ricardo Ramos fights Said Nurmagomedov. Ramos is on a 4-fight winning streak, 3-0 in the UFC. Very famously knocked out Ayman Zahabi with a spinning back elbow. that was a brutal knockout, man. Said Nurmagomedov is 12-1. I think this is. Yeah, he beat Justin Scoggins, right? Yeah, in his UFC debut, he beat Scoggins. I think this is one of Khabib's literal cousins, as opposed to his figurative cousins. Said's pretty good, but Ramos is tough. That's a tough one. It's a really good fight, actually. And again, it's going to fly under a lot of radars, but that's a really good fight. I'll go with Nurmagomedov. I usually pick Russians over Brazilians, especially in Brazil, just for the hilarity. We have a flyweight fight, one of the last, as Magomed Bibluatov fights Rogerio Bontorin. There might be some weird pronunciation there. It's Brazilian. Going with Bontorin. Bibluatov, one of the better up-and-coming flyweights, but got knocked out by John Moraga in his last fight. That was a while ago, geez. That was, October of 17, so it's been over a year for him. Did he have a injury or something? He had a back injury. Okay, he was supposed to fight Lucas Sasaki in 2018, so I hope he's healed up. I like Bibluatov, I really do, and he'll probably take this one. His opponent is making his UFC debut. This is up at bantamweight rather than at flyweight, so there might be a size differential. Bontorin's only loss is to Michinori Tanaka. Last seen on Dana's Contender Series. Yeah, I'll go with Bibluatov. And kicking everything off, we have another bantamweight bout. Oh, Bibluatov and Bontorin is at. That's the ones at flyweight. Sorry, Ramos and Magomedov are at bantamweight. Excuse me for that, my mistake. Kicking everything off, we have a bantamweight bout between Geraldo, Brazilian, right? So it would be Geraldo. Geraldo de Freitas and Felipe Colares, C-O-L-A-R, Colares. De Freitas is on a pretty significant winning streak. 6 fights, yeah. Most of them in shootout, too. That's and Colares is 8-0, undefeated, and last fought, he's been out for a while too, 17 in a jungle fight. Most of his stuff was jungle fight. His last 3 fights at least, yeah. Um, Flip a coin. Normally Kolaris fights at featherweight. Huh. It's interesting. I basically flip a coin for that one. I'll go with Kolaris just because his last name is easier to spell and pronounce. That's literally my criteria there. And that will be, again, Fight Night 144, also known as UFC on ESPN Plus 2, because you don't just need a plus 1 if you're the UFC, you need a plus 2. Yeah, I'm going to keep with those bad jokes. I apologize. You're just going to have to suffer. I will have coverage of that event in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania this coming Saturday. So stop by, say hello. I appreciate it. It's going to be an event. Again, I'm looking forward to this one, actually. It's a really solid card. More or less top to bottom. Alright, as for news, there's not a whole lot, but let's go ahead and start with Jon Jones and the drug test issues that kind of came to light over the last little bit. It was announced by VADA, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, I believe it's association, that Jon's, either his fight night or one right around it, test came back for the same thing that caused that entire event to be moved from Nevada to California. USADA will not be taking any action against Jon. The California State Athletic Commission will not be taking any action against Jon. I'm not here to tell you that you have to believe the science that was cited by all the relevant parties in this instance. If you don't, then you don't. Quite frankly, I wish the science was more settled. That's one of my big things with a lot of anti-doping stuff generally at the moment. It's just there's not a lot of actual science behind a lot of the decision making. I mean, there was actually a study done by, I think it was some Dutch or Danish, one of the two, scientists who took all of the different categorization of things that, like the World Anti-Doping or USADA, because USADA falls loosely under that purview, took a lot of the substances that they had banned and their reasoning for it and put them through more rigorous testing to see if that actually held up to scientific scrutiny. And when I say that, USADA has something like 20 some odd, like 22 I think, substances banned, that's not just that's not individual products, it is specific chemical compounds more often than not. But there's a lot. Again, they have 20 some odd on their list, and they have specific reasoning for it. And after, these people subjected them to actual scientific scrutiny and testing, and found that a grand total of 5 or 6 actually did what USADA purported them to do to cause them to be on the list. So there's a lot of just unsettled science around this. But if you believe the science that they put forward, one of the reasons that Jon won't be punished is this falls in line with what they were speculating. I mean, it's not even a theory. It hasn't been tested. Theories have to be tested and then be somewhat accepted. This is loosely described as a hypothesis that they have going in scientific terminology. But their hypothesis that Jon is just dealing with some kind of pulsing effect, or just kind of the long-term, or how else do they say? That just the half-life and the way this thing sticks around is significantly different than what we'd been led to believe by the loose scientific literature that had been done on this subject at the time. This falls in line with that. It's still those very, very small, those small amounts per liter. It's still, again, it just seems to fall in line with what they were saying. Now, whether or not you think Jon is just completely gaming the entire system, and it is entirely up to you. I don't know that I completely believe it. I will say that, again, what happened based on the test results falls in line with what they were saying beforehand, so logically this is the course of action that is put before them. Again, what you choose to believe is entirely up to you. I'm not here to preach to anyone. necessarily. I'm not here to convince you. But at the moment, there is no action being taken by any of the relevant bodies. This does cast a bit of a... This could potentially cast a shadow on Jon trying to get a license for Nevada, which should be coming up in the next couple of weeks. On the one hand, you could argue this actually strengthens the scientific... This is a point of evidence in favor of the hypothesis put forward by, again, the relevant parties. You could also say it's just it is another failed drug test for Jon, and that Nevada might not want to give him a license to compete. And I don't know what will happen necessarily, but you could spin it either way, and how exactly it's going to wind up going, I don't know. But this was his VADA test that came back. So, the other thing about VADA, and this had been mentioned, Jon signed up for it as part of the condition of his provisional license with California for the fight with Gustafsson. VADA has no VADA just tests. Like, they're not a governing body, they're not a sanctioning body. They literally just provide testing services. They have there's nothing that's going to come of it if VADA... Now, other organizations, something like USADA or State Athletic Commission, could take that into consideration and could accept it as a failed drug test, or they could also choose to ignore it if they wanted to. But again, VADA doesn't actually sanction anyone; they just provide testing services. So the big thing is going to be Jon and the Nevada State Athletic Commission in the next little bit. So we'll have to kind of see what happens at the end of that. But that was something that happened, and again, whether you choose to believe the hypothesis put forward is entirely up to you. But this does at least this falls in line with what they were saying. So again, we'll wind up seeing what comes about after all of that. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, we have a slow news week, guys, so I'm going to scrape a little bit of the barrel here. But we had some stuff from Khabib, the reigning, undefeated UFC lightweight champion of the world, Khabib Nurmagomedov, did an interview with Submission Radio, I believe it was the Submission Radio people, and he kind of laid out a plan for his retirement. He said he wanted to fight 3 more times and then retire. He wants to fight Tony Ferguson. Thank God he wants to fight Tony. I want him to fight Tony. Everyone wants that fight. I don't know of a single person who does not want to see Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson square off and fight. Everyone does. I think it's the best fight in all of MMA that you can make. So he wants that. He wants a rematch with Conor, which would be relatively easy money for him. I think, easy's a bit of a stretch, but he wants a rematch with Conor, and he wants to fight George St. Pierre, and then kind of retire. At least that's the theory he put forth. Now, how much you choose to believe Khabib, I leave that up to you. I will say this, specifically about Khabib. He is a devoutly religious individual. And a lot of the priorities that, and I say this as not as devout as I should be, but a relatively devout individual myself. Different religions, mind you, but the priorities are different. And a lot of athletes, especially a lot of fighters as well, fighters are athletes, but a lot of them put a high premium on financial success, on fame, on acclaim, and I'm not saying Khabib doesn't value those things. He very clearly does. But if he feels there's a specific time in his life when he wants to get out and get married, because he's married, he has a kid, but if there's a time he wants to leave the sport behind and just focus on being a husband and father and move on to the next phase of his life, it's different. And again, I'm not saying he might not, where exactly he falls on this is, he's still open to some degree of both interpretation and suspicion, but it's a little different when people with very devout religious convictions say that as opposed to your average fighter. And do I think Khabib's going to be gone after 3 more fights? Probably not. But Khabib is also a guy who, it wouldn't. Let me say this: I don't think he will be, but I won't be surprised if he does. If he has other priorities in life that he wants to focus on, that's entirely up to him. And I do kind of, in that sense, I just kind of wish him luck. I don't wish ill on him or really any fighters necessarily. I mean, I might kind of joke around about it, and I certainly have fighters that I might personally root for or not root for, but I don't wish ill on, in a serious sense, on anyone. So there was that, and I'll say this: if he does have those 3 fights and then does retire undefeated, that would get him to 30-0, I think. Because I believe at the moment he's 27-0. I'm going to look that up to confirm it. Yeah, he's 27-0, so that would get him to 30-0. If he goes to 30-0, undefeated, champion, with the guys he's beaten, and if he were to add those 3 specifically, so let's say he does beat Tony, huge ask. Tony doesn't lose all that often either. But if he does beat Tony and then Conor and then GSP again, there's a real argument for him as the best lightweight ever. Just the straight up best. I mean, getting past Tony alone could arguably put him there. I mean, who's he really competing against at this point in terms of like the best lightweight ever? Your argument is probably prime BJ Penn when BJ was champion. And if he beats Tony, because I mean Tony's better than everyone BJ beat during his title run by a significant margin, just all of them. If he beats Tony, I'd probably go with him as the best. I mean, hard to argue with results. And he's got those in spades, so there's that. Let's see, did we have any other fights that got made over the last little bit? I don't think so. Last week we talked about the Whitaker and Gastelum bout order being finalized. Still a few things kind of in flux around that, but that is just not a good card, man. That is really devoting a lot of faith to those top 2 fights hanging together. The ESPN card got its bout order finalized. Boy, that is a surprisingly uninspiring card. I mean, really uninspiring. Jeez. You have Ngannou versus Velasquez, which, I mean, not the worst heavyweight fight in the world, but Cane's been out for a while, and Ngannou had those 2 big setbacks. I mean, that whole fight comes down to, Francis is going to try and uppercut Cane as Cane ducks in for a single leg. Cane's going to try and throw an overhand right into a double leg attempt. I mean, if Cane's smart, he leg kicks on the outside, he fakes and feints, he gets Ngannou biting on stuff just like Stipe did, but Stipe has a much better jab than Cane. That said, there's still a few things that he can take. I mean, again, so many people took the wrong game plan from Ngannou versus Stipe. You can't just shoot double legs on Ngannou from outside. Stipe's success came from the fact that he landed leg kicks, landed jabs, threw a lot of fakes, threw a lot of feints, got Ngannou biting on them, and then capitalized. And if you try to do one without the proper setup, you wind up like Curtis Blades, and just knocked out a couple of times. Vic and Felder's a good fight. But, man, that's not the best card in the world. See, we talked about last week Barboza and KG. UFC 236 is still Got nothing attached to it. So no, I don't think there were a whole lot of fights made over this last week. So I think that's gonna go ahead and do it. That's my one set of notes. So let me check my other set. Cause yeah, again, it was just a slow news week, guys. And when it's a slow news week, there's only so much I can talk about. I'm not gonna. Oh, should I talk about Bellator? I mean, I don't like to. I don't like Bellator, but yeah, sure. I mean, it did happen. I'll go over it very briefly, I suppose. Last night, Bellator 214. Just I don't like Bellator, man. I don't like the presentation. I don't like that commentary booth. Is just the worst. Mike Goldberg and Big John McCarthy is maybe the worst commentary booth ever assembled in MMA history. But in your main event, Ryan Bader becomes the light heavyweight and heavyweight champion, knocks out Fedor Emelianenko in something like 30 seconds. I mean, look, anyone who didn't see that coming just isn't paying attention. I said when they announced all the participants that Bader was going to win that whole thing. I mean, he was an enormous light heavyweight. He's a good heavyweight. I mean, half that tournament field weren't genuine heavyweights. You had both King Mo and Chael Sonnen participating in it. Like, those guys aren't heavyweights. Not by a long shot. But Bader wins. Bader is now a champ, so good for him, I guess, for in as much as Bellator exists. Also on that card, former excuse me. Former WWE champion across various promotions, Jack Swagger, real name Jake Hager, made his Bellator debut and professional debut, and submitted a tomato can with an arm triangle in like less than 30 seconds. Look, he's, putting aside the WWE stuff, Swagger, Hager, whatever you want to call him, was a legitimate Division One he was a Division One All-American wrestler a couple of times, at least once. He's a big guy. He's over 6 feet tall. Has a legitimate wrestling background. His striking sucks. His head positioning sucks. But he's also 36. I don't think he's going all that far with this. But he won his debut, and that's more than a lot of guys do. It's more than a lot of some fighters who go on to become genuinely great lose their debut fights. It happens. So there was that. Henry Corrales knocked out Aaron Pico. Pico's young, man. He's still learning. And this is just a painful learning experience. Yeah, I think and I mean, the rest of the card wasn't all that much of anything. It's Bellator, man. What do you want me to say? Kind of sad the original main event for that fight fell through. I will say this. The original main event for that card was Mousasi and Carvalho? I have to look this up because I actually remember seeing the original main event, and it was supposed to be... Oh no, Lovato Jr., that was it, because Mousasi beat Carvalho. And Rafael Lovato Jr. is 9-0. I mean, it's hard to put into context how good he is at grappling. Former world champion, former Nogi world champion, Pan Am champion, gobs and gobs of jiu-jitsu accolades to his name. He and Mousasi would have been a really interesting fight. I was sad that fell through. Let's see. Anything else from that? No, nothing else from that card. God. Yeah, I got kind of roped into doing. I don't normally watch Bellator, and in fairness, I only watched the main event because I got roped into doing a alternate commentary thing with Mark and Pat that you can find on the Rattleton Broadcasting Network, and I just watched the whole thing muted because Goldberg and Rogan again might be the worst commentary booth in MMA history. It's so bad. It is so bad. I mean, it's worse if you. I've heard it's worse if you watch the prelims when Mike Goldberg has to try and talk about people that weren't fighting 15 years ago, and he can't tell stories about their training partners. I mean, all he's got at this point is just like fighter anecdotes, which is fine. Like that's a valuable thing to have on a broadcast, but you need someone to actually do play-by-play. It's not good. It's just bad. But yeah, I think that's it. I'm not seeing any other major news coming out. Again, there's a few things that are going to come out this week that are going to be pretty big. Again, we should have Jones and the Nevada State Athletic Commission. In theory, the NSAC will be ruling on Conor and Khabib. I say in theory because bureaucratic BS never actually ends. But in theory, we should be getting those in the near future. So keep updated on that. And again, next week, I think Jeff will be back next week, but he and I are trying to schedule that out, so there's still a few things up in the air. We'll see what happens. Next week will be a review of this event, of UFC Fight Night 144, and a preview of UFC 234. Whitaker and Gastelum and Adesanya versus Silva. Those two are really good fights. I like anytime Robert Whitaker fights. I'm a big fan of Whitaker. I mean, I think he's already probably the second best middleweight ever. He's only behind Anderson Silva at the moment, and while I don't think he's as flashy as Anderson Silva was, I think he's in many respects more sound. And so we'll see, man. But that's a really good main event. And Adesanya versus Silva is set up to be a big passing of the torch moment. For more on Anderson Silva, actually, Jeff Harris was at his open workout, so you can check his coverage of that out in the MMA Zone. So there's videos of him hitting pads. There's a bit of a Q&A period, I think. So give that a look if you're interested. Anyway, we'll be back next week. I don't have anything really to plug. Again, I have coverage, so check that out this coming Saturday. But other than that, there's no Damn You Hollywood this week, and I believe the TV party is one that I am not affiliated with, or I'm not going to be on. So I forget which one it is. Anyway, not one I'm on, because I know the next few ones that I'm going to be on. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be back next week. Again, hopefully Jeff will be back. Until then, thank you very much for listening. Always appreciated. Stay safe out there, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.